Good morning and welcome. I'm Melissa Sporn and I'm very excited to be with you this morning. I'm going to show you the first steps to making a challah dough. We're going to put it in the oven for about an hour to rise, and then you'll join me on Zoom to learn how to braid, and then we'll have a second rise while we talk about the history of challah making and some of the traditions around challah making. I want to thank you all for joining me this morning, for supporting JARC, a wonderful program that provides activities and training and resources for individuals with developmental and intellectual disabilities. We'll just get started. Hopefully you have all the ingredients. We're going to begin the process by turning our mixer on, and if you don't have a mixer, you can hand mix, that's fine. You're just going to use a little bit more muscle. So I turn the mixer on low, and I'm going to add about 1.25 cups of warm water. You want the water sort of room temperature, a little bit warmer, but not too hot. And then I'm adding a tablespoon of yeast. I use King Arthur's bread yeast, but any yeast will do. I know that we sent you out some yeast, so you can use that. So you're going to use about a tablespoon of that. To this, you're going to add about a cup of flour, and I use bread flour. That's just going to make your dough a little bit lighter and airier. Has a little more gluten in it. And you're just going to kind of pour that in and then mix it a bit and then turn it off. And this is what we call proofing the dough. We're just kind of letting it sit there and watching the bubbles rise. If for any reason after you let it sit for a little bit you don't see bubbles forming, that means your yeast is not active and you need to get a different packet of yeast. While that's being proofed, I'm going to turn my oven on to warm. So some people have ovens that have rise settings. If you have a rising setting, you can do that. I just put my oven on 150 or 125 just to warm. I'll remind you before we put the dough in to turn your oven off for the rising. It's just to keep your dough in a warm place. During the summer, you don't necessarily need to do that. Your kitchen may be warm enough. And I'm also just taking a glass bowl, a Pyrex bowl, and I'm putting some olive oil in and just kind of making sure the oil is in all of the bowl. So you can do this by taking a paper towel and kind of putting it around, and I just kind of pull it around. So now I'm going to see if I can show you my bowl so you can see how bubbly the yeast is. So we're going to bring you over here and kind of let you see the amount of bubbles that have formed. So that's kind of what you want your dough to look like at this stage of the game. And then we're now going to bring it back to that low speed of mixing. And I am using a mixing tool right now. I'll switch to a bread hook in a little bit. But we're going to add 3 eggs. After the 3 eggs, we're going to add about 1/4 cup of virgin olive oil. This is going to give it that nice golden color and also that light airiness as well. We're going to add a 1/2 tablespoon of salt. I use kosher salt. We're going to add a 1/2 cup of sugar, just regular sugar. If you want, I like very sweet challah. If you want your challah less sweet, you can add less sugar. And then I'm going to add a 1/4 cup of honey. I spray the glass Pyrex with a oil spray before so that the honey just pours out really easily. And you can use a spatula if you need to, just to get the last amounts out. There we go. Grab a spatula as well. Okay. And now we're going to slowly add the flour. And as we add the flour, we're going to kind of scrape the sides of our bowl to make sure it's all incorporating. And I do this at about a cup at a time. So I'll add a cup of flour, and then I'm going to slowly scrape the sides to make sure all that flour is incorporated. Just like that. And then add another cup of flour. And slowly you'll see the dough beginning to thicken up. And as it does this, we'll eventually, as I said, switch to the bread hook when the mixer becomes too thick and kind of clogged up. So you'll get a sense of that. If you're hand mixing, you can mix with a spatula, and you're just going to continue to add flour until it thickens up like a nice thick bread dough. I'll show you that when we get there. So another cup, and then scraping. And just continuing to do this. Usually I'm making challah first thing on Friday morning, and it's typically about a 3-hour process. The braiding and the mixing that we're doing now takes about a half an hour each or less. Really the most time-consuming things are the rises, but I can go out grocery shopping during a rise, or go for a walk, get an exercise hour in between a rise. So as daunting as it seems to spend all that time waiting for your bread to rise, you can get good stuff done during it, so don't worry about that. So now I'm beginning to see it thicken a bit, and so I'm going to switch, and you'll kind of see as I unlock this that I'll bring over the camera again so you can kind of see the thickness of the dough as it's kind of dripping off of the beating tool. There we go. Sorry, hope I'm not making you sick moving that dough. And I'm just going to kind of shake this off and use my spatula to get every bit off that I can. The dough we're making today makes 2 very large challahs. You can break that down into 4 small. You can also half the recipe and make 1 challah, 1 large challah. So those are options as well. I'm trying to clean a little as I go. So now I'm switching to my bread hook. And the bread hook is going to allow us to begin to knead the dough as we're mixing, to make it a little easier on our hands as we turn the dough off onto the counter and knead it there, which we will do at the end of this process. So again, I'm going to add about a cup, a little more, and I should be counting how many cups, but I don't. I just kind of eyeball it. You begin to see the dough thicken, scraping the sides, incorporating all the flour, and letting the bread hook knead the dough into kind of a cohesive whole. You can begin to see that. I'm going to add a little more flour. We're going to probably do just a half or a quarter cup at a time now because it's getting thicker and we don't want to add too much flour. We just want to kind of toughen it up a bit. And the longer you keep it in this mixer, the less hand kneading you're going to do, but I'm still going to recommend you're going to do about an hour of hand mixing. And I should have said in the beginning, when I take out the 3 eggs for putting in the recipe, I also take out my 4th egg for basting to just let it come to room temperature so that when we're putting it on our dough as it's coming out of the oven for the warm oven for the rise, the second rise. It doesn't flatten your dough, because if it's really cold coming straight from the fridge, it kind of shocks your dough. So we don't want that. Okay. So now you can hear the machine is working really hard to turn, so I'm going to turn it off, and we're going to move this out of the way, and move all of this out of the way, and turn our dough onto the counter. So I'm going to turn it right here onto the counter and knead it here, and move all that off. You want to wipe down your counter. I use a so you can kind of see how thick this is as I'll turn it towards you. So you can see that it's pretty thick, just coming off of the bread hook. It kind of sticks to the bread hook, so it's pretty sticky and kind of elastic. Almost looks like elastic bands as it comes off. And that's where you kind of want it before you turn it onto the counter. And we're going to lightly flour the counter before we put the dough down. So I do that by putting some flour in here. And I'm just going to lightly flour my counter. And then turn the dough upside down onto the counter. This is where having an extra set of hands would be helpful. But I'm going to scrape out as much of the dough as I can. We're going to try and incorporate all of that back into our dough. And you'll see I'm going to add flour as I go. If you have a bread knife, this is a good time to use this to kind of keep your hands a little less dirty. So I'm just going to scrape everything off that I can. And then it's a little too sticky for me to use my hands quite yet. So I'm just going to start by using this bread hook to kind of just add some flour as I begin to, that's still a little too moist, so I'm taking off my ring and adding more flour. And I'm just going to begin to turn it over and push it out. So I'm folding it over and pushing it out. Adding a little flour, kind of softening it. And as you feel it sticky, and I want you to see that if I push my finger in right now, it doesn't come all the way up. It kind of keeps that impression. And what we're going for is that it's much harder to both fold over, but also that if I stick my finger in it, it will bounce right back, is what we're working towards. So we're just going to continue to fold over. As I feel it a little sticky, I'm just going to add a little dusting of flour to it, and then again push out and fold over. And the act of folding it over with bread making sort of binds the yeast and creates the rise. So it really allows your challah both to rise and to keep shape when it rises really nicely. So I'm pushing it out and folding it over, a little bit more flour as it gets sticky, and again folding it over, see, on itself, and pushing it out. So flattening it out and folding it over, flattening it out and folding it over. And I usually am doing this for about 10 minutes. I didn't really keep track of time this time, but you want to look at the clock when you start and figure you're going to do it for about 10 minutes. That's going to help you kind of know that you've done it enough. And what you're angling for, and I'll show you when we get there, is the dough being really kind of tough. It almost gets hard to fold over because it gets so thick and the strands get so tightly wound. As you're doing this, it's an old Jewish tradition. There's a belief that because making challah for Shabbat is one of the mitzvot, that while you're doing this, you are closer to God. So some people will say prayers for healing for people in need of support or healing while they're making their challah. So you can do that if you wish to do that. So I sort of feel like I do say prayers for those in need of healing while I'm kneading my challah. And I also feel like I'm getting out any stress for the week before Shabbat by kind of really pushing into the challah. You get some good upper body muscles in use as you kind of push out and fold over. And you can see that as I begin to breathe a little heavier as I'm doing this, that it's getting a little tougher to do. So you're pushing out and folding over, and pushing out and folding over. And again, as it gets sticky, you're just going to flour it just a little bit. And pushing out, folding over, pushing out. And slowly we're getting there. It's almost really there. Just a little bit more. You can see it's forming into a nice cohesive ball, almost like of dough. And if I put my finger in, you see how quickly it bounces back right there. See? And it's almost imperceptible that I did that to it. So we're really quite there now. So I'll do one more pass just for good measure. And flour it a little bit. And then what I'm going to do, when you're all done with that, you're going to kind of neatly pull it into a ball, like so. And I'm going to take a bowl that I oiled earlier, and we're just going to put that down into the bowl and kind of just turn it around so that the oil coats the whole challah. Just like that, okay? Then we're going to take a dishcloth and cover it, and we're going to go put it in our warm spot in our kitchen. I'm going to put it in my warm oven, making sure I turn the warm oven off, and we're going to leave it there for 50 minutes, so or 60 minutes. We'll leave it there for an hour. So I will see you when your dough has doubled in size and we're ready to punch it down and braid. See you soon.